Greetings, this is Phil. I tend to communicate via screencast when I get a question that needs a little bit more than a text answer. I want to just run through the syllabus a little bit since we're starting the course on Saturday, January 3rd, and won't meet until almost a week later. Anyway, the syllabus, I hope, is somewhat self-explanatory. Please email me questions or post them to the discussion forum. But there are a couple things on it that I wanted to talk about in a little more detail. First off, I have this approach to teaching that goes by the name of team-based learning, and I think everybody that uses this approach does it a little bit differently. But I've been doing things this way for a bit over a year now, and sometimes it's a way of teaching, or it's really not exactly teaching. My role becomes leading the learning process. You know, you learn. I've long known that telling my students or telling my kids something is not a way to get them to learn. It's not a very effective way. It's not until that students really engage with the material and start working with it that they learn it. So this team-based learning is a way to use our meetings in class time to accelerate that learning process and to use techniques to teach or to manage the learning process that actually have been shown to lead to much better retention. Not sure what the pedagogy is of the teachers you've had so far, either in your undergraduate. Some of you have already had other graduate degrees, and obviously you're all in the Pacific University Masters of Business Administration program. But anyway, I want to make sure I give you proper orientation. The reason I've embraced team-based learning is threefold. First off, the team-based learning approach gets the incentives right in the sense that I hold students accountable for the preparation between class periods very directly. And I was a student not that long, well, pretty long ago now, although I'm constantly learning new things as you have been doing and will find you will always do if you lead a rich life. Anyway, I know the phenomenon of being so busy that you didn't get to the reading. Well, I'm telling you that for my class, coming into the class, you will have to have done the reading carefully. You don't have to have understood it all, but you have to have made a careful attempt to understand it before class. And without fail. That just is a fundamental principle, and I give you the incentive to do that because this team-based learning approach starts with a readiness assurance. I call it a phase, but it's a readiness assurance process, and that is a quiz on the reading. As soon as you come in and sit down and we start studying that portion of the course, there are 6 different portions, modules I call them. Anyway, you've got to take an individual test, and I try not to make it super hard yet. On the midterm, I tend to go for super hard a little bit more. But at the first cut, these IRAP, Individual Readiness Assurance Process quizzes, I'm going for questions that will be easy if you've read the material, pretty easy anyway, and will be, ideally, they'll be impossible if you haven't read the material. And those quiz grades count. And then, so there's a lot on the line. Actually, when you count in the team readiness assurance process, you've actually got a fair amount of skin in the game, about 10% of your grade. So that's it's a meaningful incentive to come in and get come in having read the material. The other reason I've embraced this pedagogy is that it uses class time for activities where being together in the same place at the same time, obviously, is useful and important. And I move passive activities offline. You can read the text, and I've chosen a text that has a really good narrative, in my opinion. When there's questions, write them down. The work in class will generally be work where we need to be in class to conduct learning activities, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those are in later on. And then finally, team-based learning implements what we know about how people learn. I'm going to jump to an image here. One of the best books I've ever read on teaching, it actually isn't a book on teaching, it's a book by a cognitive psychologist about how people learn. But this Make It Stick by Brown, Roediger, and McDaniel came out last year, might have been earlier this year, 2014. Anyway, it turns out that in order to learn, you actually, the testing process itself is a big part. Having to summon up and use the material you've been learning, and of course in varying activities, having to work with the material that you learned maybe a week or 2 weeks ago, you have to use that constantly throughout, in our case, the month. That's how people learn, not just listen to a professor talk about something. Actually, one neat thing about this book is it talks about some of the fallacies concerning learning, and some of the ways that people have the impression that they learn, but empirically, there's just very little learning going on. Actually, lecturing, listening to someone who knows what they're talking about, can give us all a very good sense that we have a clear understanding. But when you sit down and try to assess people's learning, it turns out that that's not so, that people actually know the material much better if they've struggled and work to try to express the concept themselves, even making a mistake or a bunch of mistakes and trying to express it yourself. Turns out the learning from that failed endeavor is actually a lot higher, and the retention of that learning is a lot higher than when you just sit back and listen to an entertaining lecture and really like it and have the sense that you've learned. It turns out our sense that we've learned is just dead wrong. So this team-based learning implements an approach to teaching and learning that works. And by contrast, the empirical work on students' retention and learning from the lecture method is just terrible, just flat out terrible. So we're going to work in large measure in teams. I am going to create the teams. I will do it fairly. I will tell you on that first day of class what the teams are. I know you've been together for some time now. I don't know what groupings you have. When I make teams, I will be trying for balance. I want to have a diversity of people's backgrounds, people's strengths, academic strengths, personal strengths. I go for as much diversity and as many dimensions as I can achieve in making teams. And what I really don't want to have is teams where, without any discussion, two or three members of the team just always agree with each other. Once one of them has spoken, boom, you've got three people in agreement. However wrong those three people might be. The best teams are teams where the members of the team have all come in prepared and they are ready to argue constructively with one another, not taking things personally, but really working together to float ideas, to try to shoot those ideas down, to come out of that process with a synthesis of information that hopefully is productive and not fallacious. And it's actually been a really productive learning approach, and I hope it is for us too. I'm going to stop this screencast here. I'm not supposed to go over 5 minutes on these screencasts. I rarely get it in under 10, but this is the first of 2 or 3 of these screencasts on the syllabus.